Oh, that's just okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari 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 Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vana Chari Yamuna Tira Vana Chari Yamuna Tira Vana Chari Yamuna Tiravanachariya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Gauranitai 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 Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai 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 Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivraj Jakacharya Astotar Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Brahmsiko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadeep Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Brihad Madanga Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai O glorious assembled devotees Hare Krishna O glorious assembled devotees Hare Krishna O glorious assembled devotees Hare Krishna O glorious lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga O glorious Srila Prabhupada. Let's see. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 71. So we'll just read the Sanskrit quickly, and then we can go into the verse. Okay. What's up there? Okay. Vihaya kamanya sarvan pumam charati spura nirmano nirhankara nirmamamo nirhankara sasantim adi gachati. Okay, so the word for word translation. Vihaya, giving up. Kamam, material desires for sense gratification. Ya, who. Sarvan, all. Puman, a person. Charti, lives. Nispriha, desireless. Nirmama, with a sense of proprietorship. Nirhankara, without false ego. Sahi, santim, perfect peace. Adigachati, attains. The translation. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego. He alone attains real peace. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. To become desireless means to not desire anything for sense gratification. In other words, desire for becoming Krishna conscious is actual desirelessness. To understand one's actual position as an eternal servitor of Krishna without falsely claiming this material body to be oneself, without falsely claiming proprietorship over anything in the world, is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. One who is situated in this perfect stage knows that because Krishna is the proprietor of everything, everything must be used for the satisfaction of Krishna. Arjuna did not want to fight for his own sense gratification, but when he became fully Krishna conscious, he fought because Krishna wanted him to fight. For himself, there was no desire to fight, but for Krishna, the same Arjuna fought his best ability. Real desirelessness is desire for the satisfaction of Krishna, not an artificial attempt to abolish desires. The living entity cannot be desireless or senseless, but he does have to change the quality of the desires. A materially desireless person certainly knows that everything belongs to Krishna, Ishavasyam idam sarvam, and therefore he does not falsely claim proprietorship over anything. This transcendental knowledge is based on self-realization, namely knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity, and that the eternal position of the living entity is therefore never on the level of Krishna or greater than him. This understanding of Krishna consciousness is the basic principle of real peace. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gnananjana Shrakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tom Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padansa Gana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshware Brishabhanu Suta Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpaturubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so firstly, thank you everyone for coming and taking the time to visit the temple today. I know it's midweek and there's a lot of things going on in people's lives, so yeah, thank you everyone for coming and visiting Bhaktivedanta Manor today. So yeah, we'll just have some discussion on the Bhagavad Gita, and from this purport, yeah, I guess when I was reading this purport, the first thing that stood out to me was actually, I'll just say this. Yeah, I guess the purpose of these discussions is that we can ideally just inspire each other in some way, shape, or form to take this knowledge back with us. A lot of the times we kind of will come to these discussions and it's nice to come to the temple, nice to hear, but nothing really changes. You know, we'll come and then go back to the same kind of things that we've been doing, and yeah, ideally what happens is these discussions, they trigger some thought, you know, some food for thought that we go away and we actually think about, okay, what did that mean to me? How can I apply this in my life? How can I change? And then that's where we see real change in our lives. You know, any kind of change, even if you look in secular world, it's any kind of change is based on a small habit. You know, habits are based on making small changes, and over time you see the big difference. So similarly, Krishna consciousness is like that as well, just by making these small changes, by trying to implement, trying to see where does this apply into my life, you know. So yeah, I encourage each and every one of us to have that kind of mood and meditation towards it, that have an open heart and see what knowledge is revealed to you through this discussion. So the first thing that stood out to me when I was reading this purport by Srila Prabhupada was that Srila Prabhupada says, what did he say? Real desirelessness is desire for the satisfaction of Krishna, not an artificial attempt to abolish desires. The living entity cannot be desireless or senseless, but he does have to change the quality of of the desires. And so when I was kind of thinking about this and reading this, kind of a few things came up. Um, yeah, when I was thinking about this, and um, I guess I was thinking about how do how does this for us in our own lives, and um, I guess one thing that kind of stood out to me was that we all have desires, and the question that's being said here is that one actually has to one can't artificially abolish these desires, you know. And sometimes we kind of go to different kind of trains of thought, different yoga schools, and they kind of teach of peace, meditation, yoga, breathing, and all these kind of aspects. And it's not that these aren't bona fide processes, because they can definitely help us in so many ways to maintain our health and all these aspects. um, but what we find is that even when we do these practices, when we come out from those practices, it doesn't actually give us a sustaining kind of peace that lasts. You know, we can go into, a yoga studio, but then once we've come out, we kind of end up in a similar situation um, where we have been, before, and that kind of peace doesn't last into our day. We may be able to tap into it, but our consciousness is still not able to be in that space always. So this is where Krishna consciousness is actually giving something different to what everywhere else is giving. Um, and so this point on abolishing desires came up for me because I was thinking, in Krishna consciousness, we're kind of taught about controlling the senses, and how important practice of kind of controlling the senses to engage one's senses in Krishna's service. And by engaging one's service in Krishna's service, then what happens is we purify that heart, and by purifying the heart, we then start to develop real desires, or we start to awaken our real desires towards Krishna. Um, but on that path, there's a kind of, I would say, not a dichotomy, but there's a kind of space where we have to um, learn to see our desires but not act on them. And then how do we know which desires that we act on and don't act on? So in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami, what he describes is that there's one of our previous teachers, he basically says how, he says that um, Nirbandha Sambandha Krishna Yukta Vairagya. So the Yukta Vairagya, basically what it means is that one engages their material desires for Krishna's pleasure. Because as we know that everything is actually Krishna's property. So like for example this mic, a classic example is that because this mic is ultimately is made of matter, but because we're using it in the service of Krishna to describe the glories of Krishna, to have discussions with Krishna, we're actually using it in Krishna's service. So actually it's for all of our benefit. But that same thing can be used for something which is exploitative, manipulative, and not good. So people can use this to cause havoc to people's lives. We can take, for example, YouTube. How much distress is caused just by YouTube? You know, we think about what people put out there in the world, and that's just based on using this. So it can be used for different motives. So based on that, then it's either something which is beneficial or not beneficial. And so that's one way in which we are meant to use our desires. So I may have a desire to speak, but then that if that desire to speak is to speak for Krishna or about Krishna, then it's beneficial. But if I use that desire to speak for many other things, it's probably not so useful and beneficial for us. You know. Uh, so then the question becomes, how do I know which desires to engage and which desires I'm not meant to act on, but I'm meant to kind of hold and accept? And so this is where the spiritual teacher or the spiritual master comes in, because the spiritual master is actually acting as a representative of the Chetu Guru. The Chetu Guru means the super soul in the heart. So within each and every one of us, there is us, the soul, and lying next to the soul is the super soul. And this super soul, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the first chapter, it describes how Krishna comes, and actually it says that Krishna actually enjoys, and he comes to enjoy by coming to the living entity as a spiritual master. And he enjoys that positioning of being a spiritual master. Why does he enjoy it? The reason he enjoys it is because actually this is the way that he's going to bring each and every living entity back to him. Ultimately, Krishna just wants us back. He wants to have a relationship with us. So this is the means by which this relationship with, as the spiritual master, he's going to use that relationship to bring us to him. So it says he actually enjoys that relationship. He relishes being in that position for each and every one of us. So what that means is that by having a spiritual master, you are then able to the spiritual master knows the disciple's heart, and because he's acting as a perfect instrument of Krishna, he can then give very specific guidance according to your situation, so that you know, okay, these desires are the way I'm meant to act in Krishna consciousness, and these desires I'm not meant to act on, but I'm meant to accept them and hold them, and not act on them. So we accept what's favorable and reject what's unfavorable, and that's very specific to each and every one of us. We have general principles, but it's very specific. So that specificity comes through the spiritual master. And then the other aspect comes that, okay, so say the spiritual master says that we don't act on some desires. Then the question is, how does one come to terms in their own heart that I don't actually have to, I don't have to act on these desires, but how is it one becomes satisfied? Because I'm not sure about everyone else, but I've seen in my own life, in my own heart, that trying not to act on desires is one of the most difficult things. It probably doesn't have to be, but just the way I'm set up is very difficult for me. How do you not act on desires which you're told aren't beneficial for you? And so then what came up for me was that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'm sure in the Bhagavad Gita, but so many times it speaks about becoming satisfied with one's material situation. Yeah, this point of being satisfied in one's material situation it's actually really important, because by becoming satisfied in one's material situation, one is actually able to very nicely engage in the practices of Krishna consciousness. With a peaceful mind, a clear mind, one can then easily engage in Krishna consciousness. But if the mind is all over the place, it's very difficult to. So how does one come to a stage in their heart where they can accept desires that, okay, I may want these things, but it's not beneficial for me to act on them. And so the thing that was coming to mind was about when we reflect on how in our own lives we must have seen that there's been through difficulty, through troubles, there has actually been a space where actually we've grown through those difficulties and troubles. By not acting according to the easy way in life, we've actually seen benefit in ourselves. And so then the question becomes, when we reflect on these situations, we can actually understand that through some of the greatest turmoils are the greatest benefits, the greatest wins in our life. And we can actually learn by that actually Krishna was behind all these things. And by that faith and trust in Krishna, by reflecting, having this meditation that, oh, okay, I follow Krishna's guidance. Jai Shishi Radha Gokulananda ki jai. Shishi Gaurnitai ki jai. Shishi Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai. So by learning to what were we saying? Yeah, so by learning to trust Krishna's plan, then what happens is we're able to feel very satisfied in our heart, and it becomes a very sweet exchange, because then in our day-to-day life we see Krishna acting in so many different ways, and our mind isn't disturbed by, why didn't this happen? Why didn't this happen in my life? Why didn't I do this later? Why didn't I do that before when I was younger? All these things. And there's some nice examples in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and to be honest, through all our literatures, where it's described that devotees are put through difficult situations. So one benefit of this is that we are able to reflect on our own lives. But some of us may not have so much experience in that kind of field of Krishna consciousness, and we may not be able to have that depth of reflection. So another way that we can do it is through hearing the scriptures. And by hearing about certain personalities who are able to take difficulties, difficult situations, reversals, in a way which they're able to accept it as Krishna's kindness and mercy on them, then what happens is we also start to gain that same faith and that peace in our hearts. And so there's so many examples, and kind of a couple that came to mind was Parikshit Maharaj, and how he was cursed, to live only for 7 days, and then after that he would then die, And if you think about the situation, because he's a pure devotee, he actually has and not just that, but he was wrongfully cursed. It wasn't even that he was cursed for the right reason, but his actual curse was not actually, it wasn't actually according to scripture. It wasn't actually valid. It wasn't based on scripture why he should get cursed. Because um, and so then what happened was but he accepted it as Krishna's mercy. Isn't that amazing? He had the power to overturn it as well. It's not that he had to accept it. Because he had Krishna in his heart, he was the king. He could easily said to the Brahmana's son that, no, I'm going to curse you back. But he accepted it as Krishna's mercy. And just from that, he was able to act as an instrument so that the Srimad Bhagavatam was able to be spoken for all of us. But just put yourself in that situation. If you were cursed and said that you had 7 days to live, and you had the power to reverse it, what would be our acceptance? At least for me, I know it just, yeah, I can be honest with myself. That would be my first thought. And even if the thought of Krishna came up in that, there'd be a lot of other stuff in there, you know. So it wouldn't just be the one thought of Krishna, but there would be a lot of other things that would be going on. Um, mm, yes. Yes. Yeah, so what we understand is we're the soul, so we're the eternal servant of Krishna, and that's our Nityasiddha. What's this? Jiva Swarapuri Krishna Nityadas, that we're eternally a servant of Krishna. And then next to the soul is the super soul. So the super soul is Krishna's manifestation into our heart. So that means Krishna expands himself as as the super soul in each and every one of our hearts. So he's actually in each and every one of our hearts right now, directing us. Yeah, yeah, and so what happens is by we basically the super soul, it describes in the Bhagavad Gita that the super soul is always speaking to us. He's actually always there speaking to each and every one of us. His voice is there. But right now we can't hear him because our mind is very loud. We have so many desires. But what happens is when we get in touch with Krishna consciousness, when we start to develop devotion through devotional service by hearing and chanting regularly, what happens is that that perception of the super soul in our heart becomes more alive. And then you're able to then actually hear this voice, and you're actually able to perceive what Krishna wants, not just in the long term, but in a day-to-day situation. You can perceive, okay, Krishna wants this right now, I'm going to do this. Krishna wants this right now, I'm going to do this. So by practicing Krishna consciousness, we're able to get in touch with that, and as you said, by surrender, you know. So yeah, that's kind of the, yeah. I hope that helps. Yeah. So then, yeah. So why was I speaking? So we have Parikshit, Maharaj, who's able to just take it like that. Take that this is Krishna's mercy, and because this is Krishna's mercy, I'm going to go with it and see what happens. And isn't that amazing? You don't have any idea of what's going to happen. Your life could turn upside down. You really have no idea what could happen in your life when you accept that this is Krishna's mercy. But you actually had that faith to be able to turn. And so, yeah, that was hmm, yeah, one aspect of um, how we can learn to feel satisfied with desires we may not act on right now. Um, and then the other kind of point that came to mind when I was thinking about this point was Dhruva Maharaj. So there's a pastime in the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's basically about a small boy who's 5 years old, and he basically gets he has a stepmother, and she basically she says some harsh words to him, and he gets very affected in his heart, and he gets so affected that he ends up basically going to his mother and saying like, I can't tolerate this, like I need to sit on my father's lap, because the reason that the stepmother didn't actually said these harsh words was because she was basically proud of her position, that she was the favorite wife, and she didn't then allow the son to sit on the king's lap. So the son naturally was brokenhearted, and at that time he just wanted solace. And his way of showing that desire was that he wanted basically a bigger throne, a bigger kingdom, not just than his father, but than his father's father, and that's Lord Brahma. you know. So this is he's asking for something very, very high up, very you would one would say childish, you know. And anyway, so he goes with this, and his mother basically says that he should go to the forest, and he should search out the Supreme Lord because the Supreme Lord resides there, and he can fulfill all desires basically. And anyway, what happens is the Lord basically goes to the forest. Narada Muni, he comes to see, because he sees such great determination in Dhruva Maharaj. And he sees this determination and he says that, okay, I, here's a process basically by which you can get your desired goal. He doesn't initially say that, but I'm just going to kind of skip forward the story. And so then what happens is he sees he gets the process. He's given the mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya to chant, and he practiced severe austerities for 6 months. And so he goes to a forest. He goes to a forest and practices these severe austerities for 6 months. And what happens is during that time, but after 6 months, he realizes Krishna. He comes to the perfectional stage just because of his depth of determination, sincerity of heart. So based on that, he actually attracts Krishna. And so then what happens is when he's actually got the darshan of Krishna, after Krishna leaves, there's a very nice purport that Srila Prabhupada writes, and what he says is that, okay, where are you? Therefore, also it is described that after the appearance of the Lord, when Dhruva Maharaj thought and compared his determination to his final reward, he realized that he had wanted a few particles of broken glass, but instead had received many diamonds. As soon as he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, he immediately became conscious of the unimportance of his demand from the Lord to have an exalted position better than Lord Brahman. So if you just break this down again, I'll just read the parts of it, important parts. When Dhruva Maharaj thought and compared his determination to his final reward, so his initial determination, he wanted a bigger king, he wanted prosperity, he wanted a position in this world. But his final reward was the Supreme Lord, who's the source of all pleasure, who's everything we're searching after. We may realize it or not, but actually that's all we're searching for. And so he was given the Lord, even though his initial determination was for something material. And the reason it says it's broken glass is because actually that relationship with the Lord is eternal. And not just that, but it fully satisfies the heart. But actually everything else in this material world that we search for is temporary by nature. So if someone goes to someone for something temporary, where they can get the supreme benefit, one would say it's useless, it's foolish, it's ignorant. And that's actually what Dhruva Maharaj is realizing. But he's seeing behind this the Lord's kindness and sweetness. That he went to the Lord for something. And the Lord, he didn't initially fulfill his desire, but he gave himself. The Lord's vision of this was that he only saw that, oh, Dhruva Maharaj is engaging in such determined service. And because he's engaging in such determined service, then I have to give myself. Just like in Putana's pastime, where in the pastimes of Vrindavan, what happens is there's Putana basically, she's a demon. She comes disguised as a milkmaid, one of the mothers of Krishna, and she comes to kill Krishna. She has poison in her breast, and she takes Krishna, and she comes to kill him. And would you know what Krishna's mentality is? Krishna's mentality is, oh, this person has come. This is my mother. So Krishna only takes the good, and he just exemplifies that. So this is actually who we're all searching for. And so as it says, Dhruva Maharaj says at the end, as soon as he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, he immediately became conscious of the unimportance of his demand. So this is how actually we can become satisfied. We'll realize that all the desires and everything we're searching for are unimportant when we actually realize the Lord. Right now we chant His holy names. Right now we come to see the deities. We'll read the texts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita. But are we actually experiencing the Lord in this? How much do we actually perceive that the Lord is there? We're told that anyway, Krishna is manifested in this age as His holy name. So that means that He's directly in His name. But how do we actually perceive that? Do we perceive that Krishna is there as we chant Hare Krishna? You know? And so then that's when we'll actually realize that these desires and everything else that is there is unimportant. So yeah, that was just so that was one point that was coming about how we can not kind of abolish our desires, but the quality of a desires change as we engage in Christian consciousness. Um, then the second point that kind of stood out to me was that um, yeah, Srila Prabhupada says that um, Srila Prabhupada says that in both the translation that one who has these qualifications of giving sense gratification up, living free from desires, giving up all sense of proprietorship, and is devoid of false ego, can alone attain real peace. So this point of real peace. And similarly, Srila Prabhupada says the same thing right at the end that, of the purport, that transcendental knowledge is based on self-realization, namely knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity. This understanding of Christian consciousness is the basic principle of real peace. And so this is very interesting because Prabhupada is speaking about real peace here. You know, a lot of, how many people are searching for peace in this world? All of us, no? But then Srila Prabhupada is very much deeply saying what is actual real peace and how do you find it? As we said before, real peace isn't found just by doing yoga exercises. It's actually found by something else. You know, you can't escape difficulty in this world. Krishna says that this material world is dukhalayama shashvatam, that the material miseries are bound to come. Just based on having a material body, one is bound to experience material problems. But there's a way that we can experience real peace in this. And it's not by changing our situation or doing some tricks, but actually the way is through consciousness. The way is through where one's consciousness is. And if we look at the example of Srila Prabhupada at the end of his life, what was he doing? Srila Prabhupada was on his deathbed at the end of his life, 79 years old maybe, and what, maybe a bit older, but what happened was he was there until his last breath, and he was speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam, like one of these texts of Bhagavad Gita. He was there with a dictaphone translating the Srimad Bhagavatam. How is that possible? How is it possible someone is about to die and they're still on their deathbed speaking this Srimad Bhagavatam? It's because their consciousness has gone so deep that actually, because the depth of consciousness is so much there, that any tribulation that's going on, one is able to accept that in their heart as Krishna's mercy, and by accepting that in their heart as Krishna's mercy, it becomes almost irrelevant. It becomes secondary, because one is completely absorbed in Krishna. It becomes secondary, and because one has realized, as Srila Prabhupada is saying, one has realized that, namely knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity. So when one realizes in themselves as as an eternal servant of Krishna, not just theoretically understanding that, but just actually in the heart, having faith in that and acting on that on a day-to-day basis, that I don't actually belong to this community, I don't belong to this family, I don't belong to these people. And it's not a forced thing, but just by practicing bhakti yoga, these are results that happen. And then one acts on that. And not just acts on it, but gains genuine, their pleasure and satisfaction comes through that. And because their pleasure and satisfaction comes through that, one becomes, they want more of it. So the point is that distress and difficulties won't ever go away in our lives. But what happens is, by going deep into this practice of Christian consciousness, one is able to go so deep into their consciousness that even through troubles and difficulties, one can actually feel peaceful inside. And the reason that one is able to feel peaceful inside is because what is one of the qualifications of Krishna? We hear that he's Satchitananda. The word Sat means eternal, and this eternality is actually what peace is. When you do meditation, when you do yoga, why is it, what is that kind of frame of mind or consciousness that we feel peaceful? The frame of mind consciousness that we feel peaceful in is actually because we're experiencing this, we're coming close to this Sat energy. We're coming close to this energy of eternality. And because we're coming close to this sense of eternality, we feel peaceful. But actually, if we come in touch with the person who is the source of that eternality, and we become attached to that person who is the source of that eternality, then you're always going to be eternal, you know? Just like if your father's a billionaire, you're never going to struggle for money, because your father's always going to be there to supply what you need. So similarly, Krishna's going to always be there to supply what what his devotee needs if one becomes attached to him. So this is just kind of something on how real peace is not something like an exercise or something like that, but it's based on consciousness that one attains real peace. Um, yeah, okay. And we'll just go to our last point then. How is it we get to this stage? I've said that it's by consciousness that one is able to actually attain real peace. How is it one is able to get to a stage that in every situation in their life one is able to feel peaceful in their heart, regardless of what's going on? And and the there's a few verses that came up for me, and one of them is actually two verses, or actually maybe be the previous verse in the Bhagavad Gita to what we're reading today. And in the purple, it basically describes, I'll just read the verse out. It says, a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flows of desires that enters like the rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. And it says that as long as one has the material body, the demands of the body for sense gratification will continue. The devotee, however, is not disturbed by such desires because of his fullness. And then it goes on to say, therefore he is like an ocean, describing the devotee, always full in himself. And it says, a Krishna conscious man is not in need of anything because the Lord fulfills all his material necessities. And so then what this means is that actually there's a fullness of heart that is actually to be had in our Krishna in our lives. That actually we're actually by nature have a full heart. And if one has a full heart, the pullings of the senses aren't really needed. One doesn't need to act on them. They don't feel the clinging so much. They may be there, but they don't need to be acted on because one is feeling full in their heart. They're feeling full inside. So then there's no need to act on these other things. It's like, for example, if you're hungry, and if you've eaten a big meal, you're not hungry, are you? So similarly, if we satisfy the soul through Krishna consciousness, then one is no longer in need of thirst for the material. So what's being said here is that by realizing this fullness in ourselves, that actually we don't need these other things. And there's a nice verse about how we can realize this stage of fullness in each and one of our hearts, and it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, 22:107. And the verse says, Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunoi Shravanadi Sudhi Chitta Shuddha Chitte Karye Udoy, which basically means, the translation is, pure love of God for Krishna is eternally established in the hearts of the living entities. It is not something to be gained from another source. I'll say that again. It is not something to be gained from another source. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, this love naturally awakens. So what that means is that actually this love that we're all searching for is actually already there in each and every one of our hearts. So a lot of the times we think we need to go somewhere to get something to be happy. We need to go find something to be happy inside. But actually what's being said here is that the happiness that each and every one of us are looking for is actually just in our hearts. And the process that's being given here to do that is when the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, this love naturally awakens. So this process of hearing and chanting is actually the way that we purify our hearts, and by purifying our hearts, we then will actually feel this fullness. And there's a nice example of, I'll just end on this, there's a nice example of how this hearing can, what does this hearing do? It awakens our attachment to Krishna. And as we're reading this verse today, what it says is that a person who's given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, has given up all sense of proprietorship, devoid of all false ego. There's a lot of given ups, devoid, and given ups, devoid, living free from something. But it's like if you have that's the nature of an attachment. the nature of attachment is that we feel, there's an inclination in our heart that we feel we need something. And I'm sure we've all experienced this in our lives where we have a feeling that, oh, I need to do this now. I need to do this now. But simply that's just based on attachment. Because a lot of the times, if we look at it from an objective lens, we don't actually need to do those things. But because the attachments are so deep in the heart, we feel inclined and forced to act in those ways. And so, so there's a nice example of how we reverse this process of getting attached to Krishna. And the examples of that came to my mind was Rukmini. And Rukmini, who's one of the wives of Krishna in Dwarka, what happens is that from a very young age, she's engaged in hearing about the Lord. Narada Muni comes to her palace, and every day she'll come and she'll hear about the Lord. She'll hear about Krishna. And just by this regular hearing about Krishna's qualities, hearing about Krishna's pastimes, what happens is she develops a deep attachment to Krishna. By seeing how Krishna interacts with all of his devotees, she becomes attached to Krishna. And by this attachment, her only desire, the desire in her heart just becomes, I want Krishna as my husband. And this is a very elevated platform that we can't imitate, but we can take the principle of, or at least we can't imitate our stage, but we can take the principle of hearing about Krishna and gaining an attachment for him. Because by this attachment, one is able to let go of all these other attachments and find real fulfillment in the heart. So this is how we can actually attain this real peace that Srila Prabhupada is speaking about here. So I'll just open it up. We have a couple of minutes before the curtains open. Were there any questions, comments, criticisms about what we discussed here today? So as it describes here, they're all connected. So in our age, in this age of Kali Yuga, that Harinam, 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 Eva Kevalam, that the only way in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy is the holy name. But to actually get access to that holy name to be revealed, one has to have different aspects of Krishna consciousness to be there. So when I'm sure you'd have some experience of this, where you may have practiced chanting for some time, and you may experience, I'm doing this chanting, but still not much is coming. I've done it for a few years, and I'm seeing that, okay, I've seen some change, but still a lot. There's still a long way to go from what I'm hearing in these books, that one is able to chant and tears come from the eyes. All these aspects where one is losing the thirst for the material and gaining genuine spiritual desires. So then the question is, there has to be more. It's not just the chanting, and I guess what comes to mind is there's five limbs of devotional service which it emphasizes the most important. And so chanting and Nam Sankirtan is one. Then Archanam, so deity worship, is another kind of important, and these have the most potent forms of devotional service. Then another was Sadhu Sangha, so associating with devotees who have Krishna, who are attached to Krishna. Another one is Bhagavad Shravan, so what we're doing now, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing this Krishna Katha. And then the last one, which is, there's two, so one is serving Tulsi Maharani, or living in the Holy Dham. Mathura Vas. So there's these five potent forms of devotional service, and what happens is they all help each other, Yes, yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so what we do is we do the best we can. Because what happens is, because Krishna is a person, he's in the heart, as we were saying before, he's a super soul in all of our hearts. When he sees that a devotee is trying to be sincere, what happens is he helps so much. Like we gave this example of Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj came to the Lord, and his only qualification was to his determination. But because he came with such a sincere determination, the Lord helped him beyond completely whatever he could even imagine. So similarly as well with each and every one of us, all we need to do is be sincere as possible, and we'll see, if not immediately, but maybe it's over time, Krishna will help in ways which are completely inconceivable. You know, he's so eager to have us back that he doesn't require us to change our lives so much. He may do that over time, but he doesn't require that right now. All we need to do is be as sincere as possible, and he'll arrange everything for us. Yeah, I hope that helps, Yoko. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, or we can close there? Okay. Thank you very much. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Yeah, so we'll just be having arti now. So curtains will open in about 2 minutes. So yeah, if you'd like to, just set up for that. Okay.
Do you want me to help you? Or just putting things away? Yeah, no worries. You're welcome.